Also on the grid, it is World Food Day, and a reminder that it's not about the world not having enough food. In fact, there's plenty to go around. But getting it to those who need it is still the problem, with 1 in 9 people worldwide in 2018 going hungry. And 50 years ago, 2 Americans accepted their Olympic medals. They bowed their heads and they raised their fists in a salute against racial inequality. It remains a powerful image today, and perhaps even lives on as we see footballers taking a knee in 2018. Hello everyone, you're with the Newsgrid live on air and streaming online through YouTube, Facebook Live and at Aljazeera.com. Just where is Jamaal Khashoggi, and are we any closer to finding that out? Well, the search is certainly intensifying 2 weeks after the Saudi journalist disappeared, and reports suggesting he has been murdered. Turkish investigators are due to inspect the residence of the Saudi Consul General in Istanbul, not far from the Saudi consulate, which is where Khashoggi entered on October the 2nd and, of course, never came out. The consulate itself was the subject of a 12-hour search on Monday by a joint Saudi-Turkish investigation team. It is from that search that Al Jazeera has been told Turkish forensic officers found evidence Khashoggi was killed inside the consulate. On the diplomatic and political side, this is in Saudi Arabia, the US Secretary of State Mike Pompeo meeting King Salman and also the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. US media says that US intelligence services intercepted evidence showing the prince personally ordered the operation to detain Jamaal Khashoggi. So those are the developments across the day. Let's get the latest from Jamaal Al-Shayal, who is outside the consulate now. Jamaal, any new developments?
Well, yes, a significant twist in this ongoing story, Kamal. The Consul General, who is central to this investigation, who is the most senior Saudi official in the diplomatic mission in Istanbul, and the second most senior, obviously, in Turkey as a whole, who police are expected to enter his residence in the next couple of hours as part of their investigation, has actually left Turkey. He flew out on a Saudi Airlines flight out of Istanbul just around an hour ago from now, which is bizarre to say the least, Kamal, as I mentioned, because we are expecting that the investigators who have already searched the building behind us over the past 24 hours and are expected to come and continue, we're actually going to go to his house. And why his house is so significant is because based on traffic camera video that the Turkish police have, they showed a blacked out van which is believed to be linked to the disappearance of Jamaal Khashoggi drive and park all the way up into his garage in his home, and therefore they wanted to search the home. But after they searched the home, we understood that the police were actually going to speak with him, not necessarily under custody or arrest him, but at least wanted to get information from him. But just hours after, the Turkish foreign minister said that the Saudi Consul General was not under house arrest, there was no travel ban on him, that his country was not waiving the Vienna Agreement, which gives diplomatic immunity. It seems that the Saudis saw this as a green light, and the Consul General decided to leave or flee, or at least maybe go away for a period, if not indefinitely. We're not quite sure, but he has definitely, as we understand it from security sources inside Ataturk Airport, he has left Turkey.
Yani bu şahıs evlenmek.
There is nothing new yet with regards to the investigation in the Saudi consulate. And as well, we all know Khashoggi went into the Saudi consulate to get some paperwork for himself. But at the moment, the most important thing for us is to find out what happened to Khashoggi. Of course, we will carry out necessary investigations and interviews, but this is very important for us. On the other hand, Mr. Pompeo stated that he would like to come to Ankara. We welcome him, as always we do for our allies from the US, and it is important for us the stance they have taken on the disappearance of Jamaal Khashoggi, as well as the stance against the Saudi authorities' handling of this issue.
Jamaal, how is this Turkish-Saudi relationship playing out now? Because there is this element of cooperation. We know there is the joint Turkish-Saudi investigative team, but at the same time, Turkey is effectively pointing the finger at Saudi Arabia.
I mean, that is the reality of it, Kamal, is that there, as much as maybe Turkey did not want a confrontation with Saudi Arabia, did not want a fallout with Saudi Arabia, the reality is it's very difficult for that not to happen, considering it was the Saudi Arabian consulate where Jamaal Khashoggi entered, never to leave again. It is the Saudi Arabian consulate that the Turkish investigators say they found evidence he was killed in, and therefore really you can't get away from it. But I mean, you got to break it down a little bit, right? So publicly speaking, you've had the governments remain extremely diplomatic and cordial. In fact, the Saudi government, probably more so than the Turkish, saying how strong the relationship is and how brotherly the feelings are between not only the nations, but also the leadership of it. Publicly speaking, you've had Saudi media suddenly make a little bit of a turn after like a year of essentially insulting Turkey and going on a huge campaign against Turkey because of its position vis-a-vis the blockade on Qatar and the GCC crisis. You suddenly saw a tone down of that to some extent, I would say, not completely wiping it off, but a tone down in terms of the kind of aggressive tone that the Saudi media had taken. But as we've been saying throughout, this is not just a criminal investigation. This is not just a case about a journalist who went missing. This is not just an issue of press freedom. There are so many different angles to this story, but maybe the most significant of it, probably the decisive factor of it, is going to be the angles of international politics, international diplomacy, geopolitics, and economy and money. Those are the two big players. On the one hand, you have those relationships between Ankara and Riyadh, you have US interests and so forth. On the other hand, you have the oil markets, you have the arms deals, and you have the Saudi economy, which is suffering as a result of all these massive corporations pulling out of this upcoming future investment conference, which people are now doubting whether it will continue or not. And now we're getting into the picture, the future monarch of Saudi Arabia is also possibly in question.
Jamaal Ashoggi in Istanbul, thank you for the update. We're off to Washington now, and our White House correspondent Kimberly Halkett. An update from you, Kimberly, about political developments on the US side.
Yeah, there's so much that's been happening. The latest, an announcement from the White House that there will be a background call in the coming hour on sanctions. Not clear who is being sanctioned, what is being sanctioned, if it is related to this story involving Saudi Arabia or if it could be Iran. We're not clear, so we're certainly watching that. But in the midst of all of that, there is increased outrage here in Washington, particularly on Capitol Hill by members of Congress who are questioning the ongoing U.S.-Saudi relationship and also questioning the claims by Saudi Arabia with respect to the fact that it says it does not know what happened to Jamaal Khashoggi. In fact, Lindsey Graham, speaking on Fox News here in the United States, really called into question the credibility of the Crown Prince.
Well, I know this. Nothing happens in Saudi Arabia without MBS knowing it.
Who's MBS?
He's the 33-year-old crown prince who jumped over other people. He's the son of the existing king, and I think he's on a bad track. I can never do business with Saudi Arabia again until we get this behind us.
Right. And what does that mean?
That means I'm not going back to Saudi Arabia as long as this guy's in charge.
So you're saying the Crown Prince has to leave?
It's up to them, but I'm not going back. I've been their biggest defender on the floor of the United States Senate. This guy is a wrecking ball. He had this guy murdered in a consulate in Turkey, and to expect me to ignore it, I feel used and abused. I was on the floor every time defending Saudi Arabia because there's a good ally. There's a difference between a country and an individual. The MBS figure is, to me, toxic. He can never be a world leader on the world stage.
So what does the president do? Sanctions?
It's up to the president. But what I would do, I know what I'm going to do. We're going to sanction the hell out of Saudi Arabia. You know, we deal with bad people all the time, but this is in our face. I feel personally offended. They have nothing but contempt for us. Why would you put a guy like me and the president in this box after all the president has done? This guy's got to go. Saudi Arabia, if you're listening, there are a lot of good people you can choose, but MBS has tainted your country and tainted himself.
Wow, Kimberly, what a contrast. A man like Lindsey Graham, who we know is a supporter of this administration and a supporter of Donald Trump, while in Saudi Arabia, Mike Pompeo is sitting there smiling and shaking hands with Mohammed bin Salman.
Yeah, there's no question that this White House is under significant pressure by members of Congress. It's not just members of his own party, the Republican Party, but also the Democratic Party as well, who say they can no longer sit back and turn a blind eye to the actions of the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman, the fact that he's jailed his own family members, the detention of the Lebanese Prime Minister, the blockade against Qatar, which many in U.S. Congress have called nonsensical, and then, of course, the ongoing weaponry that is used, made by the United States, used in Yemen, what the United Nations has called a humanitarian disaster. It seems that the U.S.-Saudi relationship is no longer one that a widespread number of members of Congress are feeling good about. So again, the White House under pressure, so much so we saw a tweet happening early this morning from Donald Trump where he defended what many have been focusing on as being a particularly cozy relationship between the Trump administration and the Saudi kingdom. Donald Trump tweeting, "For the record, I have no financial interest in Saudi Arabia or Russia for that matter. Any suggestion that I have is just more fake news." Well, that's not entirely true in terms of the statement made by the president there, because we do remember back in 2015, 2016, not only did he say he loved Saudi Arabia, but he also admitted that he had some business interests there, 8 registered companies. In fact, we believe that he has now disassociated himself from those companies. But certainly there are strong ties between the Trump White House and Saudi Arabia. And as you point out, making it very difficult for his diplomats, including Mike Pompeo, who, of course, has sat down with not only the Crown Prince, but also the King and the Saudi foreign minister.
Fascinating dynamics, isn't it? Kimberly Halkett's at the White House for us. Thanks, Kimberly. Right, here we go with some analysis. We've got Chris Phillips, first of all, former head of the UK National Counter-Terrorism Security Office, the crime scene investigation specialist. Nice to have you with us again, Chris. 2 weeks, excuse me, an investigation 2 weeks after the fact, plus the fact that we've seen cleaners going in to the building as well. I mean, what hope of finding anything?
Well, very little, to be honest, Kamal. What I would say is, in any ordinary investigation, pretty much everyone that's been in that embassy, been in the residence, would have been arrested. Quite simply, they would have been arrested and they would have been interviewed. And then you would start to get some of the stories. On top of that, of course, you would have forensics being done inside the buildings, inside the vehicle, inside the aeroplanes, perhaps, that have been used. So all this has not been done, which just makes the investigation very, very difficult. I would imagine that the Turks and possibly the US probably know a little bit more about this than is being brought out into the press. But even so, the chances of any of this ever coming to some form of trial is very unlikely. But still, unless they get to see the body, to understand what was the cause of death, then really we're not going to go very far with this.
All that said, though, Chris, to flip it on its head, all it would really take would be one small bit of evidence, wouldn't it? It could be, you know, one hair that was found there which belonged to Jamaal Khashoggi, or one little bit of blood splatter or something like that. That, in some ways, could that be enough?
Well, enough to do what? I think we already know what's happened in there. If we don't know exactly how he died, we certainly know that he didn't come out of there in a very good state. I think the most important thing is that we start with the body. You start with the body. You try and find the body. You try and find out the reason for the death. Maybe he was poisoned. Maybe he was shot. We don't know. So, and it's really interesting that we haven't heard a great deal about the attempts to find the body, whether it was transported back to Saudi Arabia or whether it's still in one of the buildings. I doubt that, to be quite honest, because if you want to get rid of a body, then you know, if you want to get rid of the evidence, then the body's the first thing that you do get rid of.
I have heard others speaking, and I've read about this, the idea of things going downstream. You know, if there has been cleaning up going on, water's been used, pipes, sewer systems, is that something which is a possibility as well here? Or again, 2 weeks later, are we being a bit hopeful there?
Well, it kind of depends on the ability and of the people that did the deed, whether they killed him and then as some have speculated. He's been cut up. The body's been cut up. Now you'll have trace evidence. You'll have the fact that he's touched things. Well, we know that he was inside the building. There's no dispute that he was inside the building. But when you start seeing blood and things like that, then you do get a different aspect. And of course, the way blood splatters, it can tell whether the person was alive when the limbs were cut or whatever. There lots of things around that. But I think the body is the biggest piece. If they can get hold of the body, then they'll have a much more detailed knowledge of how he died and what caused the death.
Okay, thank you so much for all those thoughts there. Chris Phillips joining us from London, a crime scene investigation specialist. And also in London, to finish things off, our senior political analyst, Marwan Bishara. Hi, Marwan. Let's start with the politics/diplomacy that's going on at the moment. Pictures, as I said to Kimberly earlier, of Mike Pompeo sitting and smiling and shaking hands with Mohammed bin Salman and with King Salman himself. What do you think is actually going on there?
Well, one possibility is that President Trump is trying to contain the situation and get to the bottom of it, as he puts it, and to see what is possible and what is not with Saudi Arabia. And I think here, Kamal, I think it's important to try and draw the parallel, if you will, between Saudi Arabia and Russia when it comes to the Trump presidency and the American establishment. Because look, both Putin and bin Salman wanted Trump to become president. And both of them, as we know, seem to be involved in extrajudicial killing, one in London and one in Turkey. And certainly one of them is an oil superpower and the other is a nuclear superpower. And clearly there is establishment in the United States that has deep hostility towards Saudi Arabia since 9/11, and certainly have deep hostility towards Russia and the Russian establishment since the Cold War. So really, all in all, it comes down to this. The American Congress is not for Putin or Mohammed bin Salman, while Trump is trying to see what he can do with both leaders.
Marwan, I think it's important, you know, we talk a lot about the politics and the diplomacy and all these ties and everything, and we can get caught up in that. The fact is, a man has been missing for 2 weeks here, and we assume he has been killed. And I've actually had a question from one of our viewers on Facebook, Elizabeth, who said, why would the Saudis want to kill Jamaal? And I think that's probably a point worth revisiting 2 weeks down the track. Can you explain?
Well, look, as you were discussing with your previous guest, this is definitely unraveling like a crime mystery, like a crime novel of sort. It's a tragedy, of course, but it is like life imitating fiction. And we've went through that. We've read that before in all sorts of novels. And all good novels start with a crime scene. And here we had a crime scene. And clearly, it is unraveling in ways that none of us expected. And certainly, let's say we are now in the 4th chapter. After we found where the crime has taken place, there's a disappearance of a man. And clearly, there is a recording by the hosting country. And then the media gets involved. And then politicians get involved. And then economies almost begin to collapse. And then there are threats of sanctions. And yet we have nobody. And we have certain culpable persons. But we don't exactly have the criminal intact. So as this unravels, we know 2 things for sure. One is that the politicians now are trying to write the last chapter. But we also know that we in the media, and Jamaal Khashoggi was a journalist, and he was killed, among other reasons, because he was a free journalist, left his country to write freely from the United States. So we in the media, we are not just covering this story. We are the subject of the story. Our freedom and safety are the subject of the story. And hence, we are in fact helping writing the final chapter of this unraveling mystery by probing, by asking questions, by demanding answers why one of our own, a journalist trying to write freely about his own country, was killed by a dictatorship. And not only was killed by dictatorship, but certainly lied about it and continues to lie about it until today.
Good point, well made. Marwan Bashara, our senior political analyst in London, thank you. And thank you, Elizabeth, for that question as well. Leah, your turn now. How big is this story 2 weeks down the track?
It really does keep building. I said that last week, that it seems to snowball and kind of have that snowball effect, and it really does. Jamaal Khashoggi's name is still trending worldwide, and it really hasn't stopped doing so in the last 2 weeks. The conversation is strongest in the U.S. and the U.K., but also, interestingly, in Saudi Arabia. We have hundreds of thousands of tweets with people asking questions, people defending journalism, and also pointing fingers at who's to blame. Most of the blame is directed at Saudi Arabia and the Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman. Lalo Alcaraz in the U.S. drew this political cartoon with the Crown Prince asking Khashoggi who, with a dead body at his feet. Now, Donald Trump is also condemned for not doing more and bowing to Saudi Arabia to ensure lucrative trade deals continue. This graphic summarizing that. And many cartoonists like SMJ Tahiri from Iran showing the love affair really going both ways. Now, it's not just blame for the U.S. Martin Shovel asking here, where does Britain draw the line when it comes to funding human rights and Saudi Arabia? The online criticism, of course, is not limited to cartoons.
Here's how weak Trump's excuse is. Even Saudi Arabia is not buying it, because this afternoon, CNN reported that Saudi Arabia is planning to admit that Jamaal Khashoggi's death was the result of an interrogation that went wrong. Let me ask an obvious question. Any interrogation that includes 15 men and a bone saw, how's that go right? This is one of the most disturbing violations of human rights in recent memory.
People are also calling for justice. Even Republicans, those who broadly support Donald Trump's policies, are wanting answers.
America must take tough action. And making money and selling more weapons, because we're going to have a bottom line with more money, is not an excuse for America not to stand tall and to make it clear to the world that we believe in human rights and are prepared to defend them.
John Kasich there actually ran for president against Donald Trump. And now the conversation is focused on U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and his visit to Saudi Arabia. Many online are saying if there are not answers from this trip, then there need to be consequences. We want to know what role you think the U.S., the U.K., and other countries should be playing in this investigation. You can let us know by leaving a comment with our hashtag on any one of our platforms, but especially on Twitter with our hashtag AJNewsGrid. Kamal.
Thank you, Leah. Remember, the latest updates page is up and running on Jamaal Khashoggi as well. A peculiar story because of how slow it's been in terms of official information, but relentless in the amount of information and the leaks that have come out from other parties. So if you just search for Khashoggi latest updates, you'll find it, or you can have a look in the What's Trending section at Aljazeera.com. And thank you for getting in touch with us as well. Contact details on screen for you now. So many comments and questions, all of them just saying what is going on, or variations of what is going on. I just had a comment from Hussein, or a question on Facebook Live. He said, do the Saudi dictators have evidence to prove that Jamaal really left their consulate? Well, they haven't shown it. I think they said that there were cameras, but that they weren't recording at the time. So they've said he left 20 minutes afterwards, but there's been nothing definitive, only the pictures of him going in. So thank you so much for all your questions. I'll come to more of those comments and retweet some of them later as well. Hashtag AJNewsGrid. Now, it has also been today 1 year since another journalist was killed in Malta, Daphne Caruana Galizia, who died in a car bomb blast. She was investigating corruption in businesses and the police and the Maltese government, and her family and friends are demanding a public inquiry to find out who is responsible for her death.
The focus of that inquiry, unlike the current processes, is to look into whether Daphne's life could have been saved. So that would mean looking into possible state failure to protect and possible state complicity in the assassination.
There was nothing like her before, and there's been nothing since. Her bravery, I imagine, will inspire others in the years to come locally. She opened many people's eyes to what journalism could be.
And this is Daphne's blog, or notebook, as she called it. Running Commentary was the name. Her last post, well, obviously from 12 months ago, and it was entitled That Crook Schembri was in court today pleading that he is not a crook, and all the way down, story after story on Malta's politics, the kind of stories which many would say got her killed.
Well, people around the world are remembering Daphne in many different ways. She's mainly seen as a face of persistence, courage, and hope, and many refer to her as a hero and an inspiration. But not only are people remembering her, the majority of people also online are insisting for an international independent investigation under the hashtag Justice for Daphne, or by using simply her name. Now, they say the national investigation outrageously has been stalled and obstructed. 6 international press freedom and freedom of expression groups have traveled to Malta to mark the first anniversary. Now, this is the most recent of a number of public memorials and tributes that have spontaneously popped up across Malta for Daphne. Journalists posting pictures of them from Malta showing their solidarity online, like Courtney here. Now, others are simply tweeting from elsewhere around the world. One user saying that we will continue to insist that justice is found for her and her loved ones. The Maltese authorities need to urgently find those responsible, she says, for this horrific crime. And Mandy posting pictures here of public, saying that the public rather deserves answers, and those involved in Daphne's assassination must pay for their crimes, no matter who they are or what position they hold. And according to UNESCO, 9 in 10 cases of killed journalists remain unresolved, and this does little to reassure journalists that they can continue their vital public service. Now, Forbidden Stories is a collaborative journalism network devoted to protect and publish the work of journalists who are threatened, jailed, or killed across the world. I leave you with this.
Forbidden Stories was created as a platform to protect stories of silenced journalists. Threatened journalists can back up their sensitive information through one of our encrypted channels. Their stories will be held securely. In case something happens, Forbidden Stories will be able to access the stories, complete them thanks to its partners, and reveal it broadly. The first Forbidden Story was about Daphne. We coordinated the work of 45 journalists to review a massive number of files in a complete secrecy and complete Daphne's investigations with one common objective: revealing what her killers wanted to hide.
Rebecca Vincent with us now. She's the UK Bureau Director at Reporters Without Borders, joining us from Malta. Thank you for your time, Rebecca. A year since Daphne died. Tell me about this past, well, it's been, I guess, 10 months of 2018. How bad has it been for journalists?
Well, this year actually is already set to be, unfortunately, one of the deadliest years for journalists on record. As of today, Reporters Without Borders has data showing that 71 journalists, citizen journalists, and media workers have already been killed this year. That means in the first 9 months of 2018, we had already passed year-end figures from last year. It's incredibly worrying.
What can be done for someone like Daphne a year later? Because trying to get an investigation for someone who was going after those in power, I mean, it's fraught from the outset.
Well, we're here in Malta in part to renew calls for exactly that, for justice for Daphne. We have raised our concerns with the highest level of government here. We met with Prime Minister Joseph Muscat yesterday. And in addition to pushing for a robust, independent investigation to take place here, we're also calling for a public inquiry to be immediately established to determine whether her assassination could have been prevented.
And what do they say back to you, Rebecca? I'm always fascinated by people like yourself who go directly to the people in power. You tell them what you want. What do they say in return?
Well, the Prime Minister told us that he's satisfied that the investigators are doing their best. We're not satisfied. It's been a full year, although 3 people were arrested who appear to have been involved in the actual carrying out of this attack. Their trial has not yet started, and there has been no tangible progress into identifying others involved in the attack, whether facilitating or, most importantly, the masterminds behind this attack. So that can hardly be considered justice. So we've pushed him on that point. We are not satisfied. On the public inquiry, Mr. Muscat repeatedly said it's not a question of whether, but when they will launch a public inquiry. However, the government says that they will wait until the criminal investigation has concluded. That's not frankly good enough, because at the moment, journalists in Malta remain at risk. Until we understand why this happened to Daphne, how this happened to Daphne, whether there's a possibility of any state involvement, whether they should have, could have protected her, they cannot possibly provide sufficient protection to others who are continuing to do the sort of courageous public interest investigative reporting that Daphne was doing.
Rebecca Vincent is with Reporters Without Borders, joining us from Malta on this one-year anniversary. Thank you, Rebecca. I do appreciate it. No grounds for optimism on a Brexit deal. That is the word coming from the European Council President himself, Donald Tusk, before a key summit in Brussels on Wednesday. Britain's Prime Minister Theresa May also met her own cabinet a few hours ago to discuss the status of talks with the EU. She says an amicable divorce deal can still be achieved. Emma Hayward, following this story from London today. She might say that it can be still achieved, but wow, time's running out, Emma.
It's going to be tough, isn't it? And I think they are ever hopeful on both sides. Theresa May held a cabinet meeting with her cabinet ministers this morning. She seemed that it went quite constructively. She told them if they all stand together, she is sure that they can achieve some. But of course, there are divisions within her own cabinet of exactly what the Brexit deal should look like. And at the centre of that is what should happen to the border between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland post-Brexit, and what that should look like. And that is where there are differences between what the EU wants and what the UK wants. Now, Donald Tusk, the EU Council President, is saying that Theresa May really needs to put something new on the table to get through the impasse when they meet tomorrow.
For a breakthrough to take place, besides goodwill, we need new facts. Tomorrow, I am going to ask Prime Minister May whether she has concrete proposals on how to break the impasse. Only such proposals can determine if a breakthrough is possible.
I think both will be hoping for something new on the table that they can take back to everybody and say this is what there is, because I think certainly from Theresa May's point of view, she doesn't want a repeat of the Salzburg summit where she came back with literally nothing and looked a very, very isolated figure after that summit.
Emma Hayward in London following Brexit developments. Thank you, Emma. This is the News Grid, and if you're watching us on Facebook Live, a bonus story coming up for you now on Afghan migrants using music as therapy in Iran. And then later we meet a Native American woman who could be making history in the US midterm elections, just weeks away now, 3 weeks in fact. That story and plenty more to come.
از اونجایی که زنها توی افغانستان واقعا مظلوم واقع شدن، آرزوم اینه که یک روزی نه تنها توی موسیقی بلکه در رشته‌های مختلف، ورزش، سیاست بتونن خود واقعیشون رو نشون بدن به همگان و دوست دارم که اون آزادی رو حس کنن. هدف من توی موسیقی واقعا کمک به مردمم هست، فقط همین. چون مردم ما واقعا روحشون و قلب‌هاشون توی این سال‌ها شکسته و واقعا اندوهگینن همشون. و من هدفم فقط اینه که من برای 10 سال آیندم شاید این رو اجرا کنم، یک مدرسه موسیقی یا آکادمی اونجا داشته باشم و به قلب‌هاشون، به روحشون کمک کنم.
اینجا افغانستان است، جان آدم ارزان است، راه بهشتت از همین جسیر بسم برای همین طالبا و والا داعش بهش رفتن آسان است، یعنی از افغانستان آسان است. راه بهشت همین است، آدم کشتن آسان است، یعنی اینجا یعنی جان آدم ارزان است و این مثلا برای همین وضعیت افغانستان که راحت میکشن به خاطر اینکه برن بهش.
Headlines are at Aljazeera.com and what's trending as well. Couple of stories there on Jamaal Khashoggi at the top, including at number 2, Mohammed bin Salman, the dark side of Saudi Arabia's crown prince. So much attention on him and his actions at the moment. And number 5 as well, it's high time to end Saudi impunity. And, you know, that's what a lot of you have been saying in the comments on Facebook Live tonight as well, that Saudi Arabia needs to be held responsible for this. That is what's trending. Have a look for yourself this Tuesday at Aljazeera.com. It is, if you didn't know, World Food Day, 24 hours dedicated to tackling global hunger, which, as you're going to see, is a massive issue, but may not actually be as complicated as it first seems. Because food supplies aren't necessarily the problem, it is access and distribution of that food where it goes wrong. We're going to start with this from Mediana Hond.
The world produces enough food to feed every single one of us every day. And yet, 1 in 9 people go hungry. That's more than 820 million people. Now, we're not talking about missing a meal. These are chronic, long-term shortages of the nutritious food all of us need to lead healthy, productive lives. And a disproportionate number are women and girls denied equal access to work, resources and opportunities. A child dies from hunger every 10 seconds. Around 9 million people die every year. But for those who live, there are long-lasting, debilitating consequences that can span generations. A hungry adult may be too weak to work, more susceptible to illness, less productive. Pregnancies are likely to be more difficult. A child's growth is stunted, their brains, organs, skin and bones. Over time, they can develop chronic health problems and fail to develop fully, affecting their education and job prospects. And so, the cycle of poverty and hunger begins again. What's astounding is that many of those going hungry live in countries where there are food surpluses, not shortages. Problem is, they simply can't get hold of it. Issues with transport or storage, or they're caught in the chaos of war, climate change, or natural disasters. Add to that the problem of food waste. A third of the world's food is just thrown away. Member states of the United Nations made a commitment to eliminating hunger completely by 2030. It's based on ample evidence that global hunger is fixable, and there's a clear, achievable strategy on how to do it. It's just a matter of delivering on that commitment. As the world's population grows, the consequences of not acting are catastrophic.
And on top of all that, which Mediana has talked about, is cost. Because, of course, if you're cash poor, then you're likely to be food poor as well. Just have a quick look at this from the World Food Programme. They've called it Counting the Beans, which sounds like an Al Jazeera business programme. But we're talking about bean stew here, or lentils, or just something simple which anyone could make and would fill you up. So what they've got here is a list and saying that, well, maybe not surprisingly, in New York State, it would be 0.6% of someone's daily income to make that meal, and that would be $1.20. And then look how it goes up and up and up to the point where Gosh, right at the bottom, and it's a huge jump. They're saying South Sudan, almost $350 just to make that one plate of food. Nigeria, DRC, Malawi, Yemen, all down there at the bottom of that list as well. So let's talk to Jose Rosero Moncayo, who is from FAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization of the United Nations. He's joining us on Skype from Rome. Nice to have you with us. I believe the goal from the United Nations was to have zero hunger by the year 2030. Is that correct?
That's correct. Thank you very much for your interview. I'm happy to be here. It is true. So the SDG goal is hunger eradication, and actually that's what is important right now. What the 2018 World Food Day brings to us is a reminder that highlights the need to step up efforts to end hunger. Unfortunately, as it was said, after some decades of reduction of hunger, hunger and actually also malnutrition are on the rise. And this threatens all the gains that we have been seeing in past decades.
Okay,
now
so then we have to talk
back.
about, sorry to interrupt you, we have to talk about how this can actually be achieved, because 2030 is only 12 years away. And as I said at the start of this section, access seems to be a huge issue, doesn't it? How do you improve that? How do you get food to the people who need it?
Exactly. So, as you said, the key is to promote the access to affordable food. How? There is at least three specific factors that we can mention. First is to promote inclusive growth policies. It's not only needed to grow as an economy, it's also important to share this growth for all the population. In that sense, we have to target the poorest and the most vulnerable people, especially in the rural sector. You know that 80% of the poorest people live in the rural sector, in order to promote opportunities, labor opportunities, income opportunities of this population. As well, and this is the second one, we can foster social protection schemes in order to lift the poor out of poverty, and also to engage them into the productive system. Also, and this is the third, we can build the resilience of them, especially farmers, against climate extreme variability, climate events. For example, promoting the infrastructure that protects farms against floods, or as well to use technology in order to promote the use of seeds that are more resistant to drought and diseases.
Okay, Jose Rosero Moncayo joining us from the Food and Agriculture Organization at the UN. Thank you. And just a reminder of the length some people have to go to. Think about this when you have your next meal, because yes, every part of the world does deal with a different reality when it comes to food shortages. But in Yemen, ravaged by war, we know that starving families are eating boiled tree leaves to survive. Have a look at this video. It's from our social media team.
احنا نطبخ اوراق الشجر وناكل من الشجر وننطق من الشجر صلى على النبي. يعني هنا ما يقول لك يعني تغذيه ما بوش تغذيه خماد موت في هذا المكان الا الله. من يجي ينظر علينا؟ على من نشتكي؟
أصبحت الوجبة المفضلة عند أولادي، يأكلوا منها رواصل، خاصة وجبة الظهر، وتجيب لهم ظمأ وتجيب لهم حكاك لكن ما نسوي.
Just a quick look at some other stories making headlines around the world today. And Nigeria's government says it is shocked and saddened at the inhuman killing of a second Red Cross aid worker held hostage by Boko Haram. Hawa Liman was one of 3 women kidnapped during a raid in Borno State 7 months ago. She was killed after her colleague suffered a similar fate last month, and despite pleas for mercy by the Red Cross, it has a policy of refusing to pay ransom demands. And Facebook says it's removed pages and accounts linked to Myanmar's military that were being used to spread propaganda. A New York Times report found military personnel were using social media to target the Muslim Rohingya minority. Human rights groups say the campaign played a key role in the crackdown in Rakhine State last year, which led to hundreds of thousands of Rohingya escaping to neighbouring Bangladesh. In 3 weeks' time, Americans will be voting for new members of Congress in the midterm elections, and there is a record number of women running for office. But no Native American woman has ever been elected. Rob Reynolds met one woman, though, who has a strong chance of changing that.
How you been? Deb Haaland is running for Congress and hoping to make history.
Never having had a Native American woman in Congress has never heard a voice like mine.
Campaigning at New Mexico Highlands University, Haaland, who is a member of the Laguna Pueblo Native Nation, said her #1 issue is protecting the environment.
It shouldn't always be about money. It should be about respect and love for the land and respect for people's cultures.
Haaland is part of a large influx of Democrats, women, minorities, and other marginalized groups seeking office, many for the first time.
I think representation matters a tremendous amount, and I think diversity really matters. And so, yes, all those voices and the large number of women who are running for office, I think we can change the trajectory of our country.
The New Mexico district Haaland seeks to represent includes part of the city of Albuquerque and tilts heavily Democratic. Polls show her 9 percentage points ahead of her Republican opponent, Janice Arnold Jones, who, in an interview, seemed to question Haaland's Native heritage.
But she is a military brat just like I am. And so, I think it evokes images of that she was raised on a reservation.
Haaland's supporters say if she's elected, she would bring a unique perspective to Washington.
Not only would she bring the contemporary information and knowledge that she needs to make decisions, she would also have this grounding of time and a grounding of making sure that the decisions that she makes are centered for the future.
Across the country, Native Americans are demanding a stronger political voice. According to the National Congress of American Indians, more than 100 Native American candidates are running for federal or state office in the U.S. this year. Graduate student Renee Mondragon listened to Haaland's speech and came away impressed.
I'm a minority, Hispanic minority. While I'm not Native American, she speaks for me too. It's up to us to stand together united and kind of push forward for what we believe because we are the majority.
A candidate like none before in an election season like no other. Rob Reynolds, Aljazeera, Las Vegas, New Mexico.
And if you're looking to understand exactly how these midterms work and why you should care, this is the article you need. Everything explained in the simplest of questions and answers with links to further reading on the big election issues. US midterms, how they work and why they matter. It is at aljazeera.com. All your comments today concerning Jamaal Khashoggi. I've had a question from Gulzar on Facebook who said, how far is the death of Khashoggi relevant to the US? Well, 2 things. One, the US has a lot of influence and a lot of deals with Saudi Arabia, but also the fact that Khashoggi wrote for the Washington Post and he was a US resident who was apparently applying for his residency as well. So it does very much concern the United States. And Iron has said, if you kill a journalist inside your embassy, you will always be a tribe, not a nation. Doesn't how much money or oil you have. Your comments, your questions, the hashtag AJ Newsgrid. Once again, for the Facebook Live crew, an AJ Plus story for you now about a Kenyan entrepreneur turning fish skin into fashion. And then Andy is here with your sports news. 50 years on, we will hear from 2 of the athletes involved in one of sport's most iconic political moments. First, a quick look at some international weather.
Kisumu, we have several filleting industries, fish filleting industries. They produce close to 150,000 metric tons of fish waste. 80% of this is actually fish skin. Initially, this fish skin used to be thrown.
And he's here now. We journalists can use the word iconic a little bit too much. But
yeah,
in this case, I think
we'd agree about the photograph we're about to see. 50 years ago today, 3 young athletes decided to take a political stand at the Mexico Olympics. The photograph of the medal podium for the 200 meters has become one of sport's most iconic images. Americans Tommy Smith and John Carlos bowed their heads and raised a fist in what they described as a human rights salute, and it became an enduring symbol of the fight for racial equality. The third man was Australia's Peter Norman, who stood in solidarity with the pair. Norman died in 2006, while Smith and Carlos remain outspoken activists. Well, all the athletes were part of the Olympic Project for Human Rights. Its aim was to protest against racism around the world. Smith had just become the first athlete to break the 20-second barrier in the 200, but after the protest, he and Carlos were immediately suspended from the US team. Carlos said the reason for the closed fist was to show that black men in America are united. Like Smith and Norman, he'd never compete at another Olympics. It was Norman who suggested Carlos and Smith share the pair of black gloves they had so both could raise their fists. He faced huge criticism in Australia. Only after his death did the country's parliament formally apologise for his treatment.
You know, it was a silent electrification of what was going to happen before the fist went up. I know a change was about to come. That's why I love Sam Cooke's song, "A Change is Going to Come," because I needed a platform.
Doing the right thing is not an easy thing to do for me or anyone else. I stood there 50 years ago on the podium with one guy had his fist up with me and another guy stood there in support of me. But 50 years of that poster being there, we three cannot change society to make it better without the help of you.
Well, earlier on, we spoke to sports historian and former athlete Victoria Jackson. She says that using the medal ceremony as a platform for protest ensured their message was heard all around the world.
The athletes who go and represent their countries are representing much more than just the flag and the nation. They're representing ideas about, the best way to organize a political economy, ideas about meritocracy and democratic freedoms. And so for athletes to take that moment and do something that they believe is in line with the project of patriotism and working toward making their country a more inclusive, truly free and equal place, that's different from the politics of those with kind of privileged authority who believe, this is a moment in which you're respectful and shouldn't do anything to push against that. The vast majority of white America was horrified by what Smith and Carlos did on the podium and disgusted by it and used unapologetic language in their, moral castigations of this act, this political act. Peter Norman was in full support of what Smith and Carlos decided to do on the podium. And so the Australian Olympic Committee is horrified that Peter Norman would act in this way. They basically blacklist him, they blackball him. He no longer is in a position to be named to any Australian national team. He never competes for Australia again, despite being Australia's #1 sprinter for years after that.
Well, there are obvious parallels with the ongoing campaign headed by former NFL player Colin Kaepernick. Last month, remember, he fronted a Nike ad campaign. That didn't go down well with Mary Bono, who's just been put in charge of US gymnastics. That, though, is not the picture of Mary Bono, but she was saying, unfortunately, I had some Nike shoes in my bag. Luckily, I had a marker in my bag too. And she's now deleted the tweet whereby she criticised Kaepernick as well as Nike. There's been reaction from Simone Biles to that post from the four-time Olympic champion saying, mouth drop, don't worry. It's not like we needed a smarter USA Gymnastics president or any sponsors or anything. The organisation is still dealing with the fallout of sex abuse, a sex abuse scandal involving team doctor Larry Nassar. And also from Ali Roseman, who, like Biles, was a victim of Nassar. She said survivors, current gymnasts, families, coaches, gymnastics community and fans deserve better. This, after it was revealed, and this is a real kicker, Bono had also worked for a law firm which represented Nassar during that abuse case. Well, let us know what you think. Get in touch with me at @AndyR_sport or use the hashtag AJNewsGrid. There's more sport in the 1800 GMT News Hour, but let's get back to Jamaal for now.
Thank you, Andy. Well done. As you might have seen, we're having a few technical problems, but the story that was in Andy's wall, we're going to do that now. More proof, I believe, that our days are numbered. You remember the robots in the US which can jump and run and open doors? Well, we often show their latest tricks here on NewsGrid. They've got a friend in the UK who can talk. Now, at first glance, this looks like your average parliamentary select committee, but sitting on the panel is Pepper the robot, who was there to answer questions from MPs about care for elderly people. Pepper is what's known as an emotionally aware robot. And, well, just have a listen.
This session has come about. Pepper, could you please introduce yourself?
Good morning, Chair. Thank you for inviting me to give evidence today. My name is Pepper and I'm a resident robot at Middlesex University.
Yep, just a robot addressing Parliament. Just like that. Absolutely extraordinary stuff. Thank you for joining us on the Newsgrid. If you want to get in touch with us, you know how to do it. Hashtag AJNewsGrid, Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp, Telegram. And we'll see you back here, Studio 14, 1500 hours GMT tomorrow, Wednesday.